these calls from the
Springfield,
constituents.
Dana, and they're telling me this stuff is happening. Dana, would you like to ask me questions and then let me answer them, or would you like to debate me on these topics? I noticed that when you had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, you gave them multiple choice answers to the questions that you asked, and you allowed them to answer the questions. I'm happy to be here to talk about policy, but if you're going to interrupt me every single time that I open my mouth, then why am I even doing this? So please, ask a question, and I'd ask you to be polite enough to let me answer.
That's Trump running mate J.D. Vance nuking CNN media propagandist Dana Bash for her repeated interruptions disguised as unbiased fact-checking. Welcome to Nerk News, I'm Nerkish, and J.D. Vance has always been pretty good at navigating establishment news interviews and dealing with the constant BS they spew, but something's changed in him and he seems to be counterpunching a lot more than he used to. Here he is forcing Dana Bash to stop pretending to be an objective journalist and reveal the politically motivated hack she really is.
But you're not just a bystander. You're the senator from Ohio. So instead of saying things that are wrong and actually causing the hospitals, the schools, the government buildings to be evacuated because of bomb threats, because of the cats and dogs thing, why not actually be constructive in helping to better integrate them into the community? Because there are a lot of employers there who say that the Haitian workers are helping fill jobs that they need desperately filled.
Dana, first of all, let me just respond to a couple of things that you said, but I want to start with something you said, which I think is frankly disgusting and is more appropriate for a Democratic propagandist than it is for an American journalist. There is nothing that I have said that has led to threats against these hospitals. These hospitals, the bomb threats and so forth, it's disgusting. The violence is disgusting. We condemn it. We condemn all violence.
Senator, this happened after you and President Trump were on the debate stage, said that cats and dogs were being eaten.
You asked a question, Dana, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it. What we have said is that this town has suffered terribly under the policies of Kamala Harris. Now, you just accused me of inciting violence against the community when all that I've done is surface the complaints of my constituents, people who are suffering because of Kamala Harris's policies. Are we not allowed to talk about these problems because some psychopaths are threatening violence? We can condemn the violence on the one hand, but also talk about the terrible consequences of Kamala Harris's open border on the other hand.
You know, it's funny how CNN's narrative aligns so well with Democrats and the White House on this issue. I mean, it's a little interesting that they just take everything at face value and don't bother questioning if the rise in hate crime reports that liberals were essentially begging citizens to submit might be, I don't know, a little biased or manufactured. Similarly, there's apparently no speculation on the threats that were called in and whether they were genuine or from deranged lefties trying to spin this into a bigger issue because the media's convinced them that Trump and Vance are evil monsters.
You said that all of these migrants are in the country legally. They are in the country through what's called temporary protective status.
Right.
That is when Kamala Harris waved a magic amnesty wand, taking people and giving them legal status. That is not to say that they're here legally. That is a terrible indictment of her amnesty policies that have further opened the border and further caused terrible migration into this country.
You might not agree with the policy, and obviously you don't, which is totally fair and legitimate. There are policy disagreements all the time. But the fact is it is the law because President Biden and Vice President Harris are. But I don't want to frankly go down this conversation about policy because
you made a point. You don't. I agree. You don't want to talk about policy.
No,
Dana,
what I want to talk about
instead of about the fact,
Senator,
that
it was
Harris,
your distraction.
Dana, granted amnesty.
You were the one who started talking about eating dogs and cats.
Level.
You were the one who
Dana,
brought this
my
up.
constituents
The president
were the
said
ones
it to
who talked
60
about eating
million
dog and
people.
cats, and I talked about it because you were ignoring this community. My constituents talked about it.
Have you been
it is
to
my
Springfield?
Responsibility to surface their concerns when the American media
Have you been to
ignores it.
Springfield?
Dana, I've been to Springfield probably 100 times in my life.
How about
I've taken
recently,
my children
since
to
you've
get
heard
ice
this?
cream at Young's Jersey Dairy.
Have you heard recently since you've gotten these calls?
Have I been in the last 4 days?
No,
no,
I'm
I
talking
haven't been
about
in the last 4 days, but I've
since
talked
you've
to a lot
gotten
of
these
people in
calls from the
Springfield, Dana,
constituents.
and they're telling me this stuff is happening.
Now, I've seen a lot of propaganda from Dana Bash over the years, but never anything as open as this. You can tell that Vance really got under her skin here because she's a lot more combative than usual. I mean, after this, her handler's probably gonna have to calm her down with some sugar cubes or something. I mean, normally she would just stick to saying it's Vance's fault and they're being forced to report on it constantly, because after all, he made the comments and they can't help but cover something that's been discussed ad nauseum for the past 5 days.
Is that they can't afford housing, they can't afford health care. The schools have been overwhelmed, the hospitals have been overwhelmed, and they're overwhelmed because Kamala Harris allowed 20,000 Haitian migrants to get dropped into a small Ohio town of about 40,000 people, and it's completely overwhelmed the services. Now you ask, why have I talked about some of the things that I've been talking about? Let me just say this. My constituents have brought approximately a dozen separate concerns to me. 10 of them are verifiable and confirmable, and a couple of them I talk about because my constituents are telling me firsthand that they're seeing these things. So I have two options, Dana. I could ignore them, which is what the American media has done for years to this community, or I can actually talk about what people are telling me. And of course, many of the things that the media says are completely baseless have since been confirmed. For example, I was told, Dana, that by the American media, that it was baseless that migrants were capturing the geese from the local park pond and eating them. And yet there are 911 calls from well before this ever became a viral sensation of people complaining about that exact thing happening. So my attitude is listen to my constituents. Sometimes they're going to say things that people don't like, but they're saying things that people don't like because their town has been overwhelmed, and it's my job to try to fight for them and to protect them. Kamala Harris opened the border, and now these people are suffering. That's what I'm focused on, Dana.
You know, I'll admit I was a little on the fence with Vance, but if he keeps this level of pushing back on the media, I might be on board. Because frankly, this whole interview was something else and reminds me a lot of Trump in 2016, where one of his greatest contributions was highlighting the flagrant bias taking place in establishment media. But let me know what you think. How did JD Vance handle himself in the interview? Was he too aggressive? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That stuff really does help us out. Until then, this has been Nerk News. Thanks for watching. Bye!